Hey, Slater Crusaders, how are you? America's the greatest country in the world. Thanks for being here. So I feel like the president's team is going to make their case here really soon. So I just want to do a quick recap of everything we've covered so far, and I want to make this claim here very clear. I have never made a voter fraud claim that the left-wing media has not been making for the last 2 years. All right, I'll say it again. I, on this show, have never made a voter fraud claim that the left-wing media has not been making themselves for the last 2 years. I have been in the darkest depths of the internet, reading and diving into every single election day conspiracy conceivable. On this show, we've never made a voter fraud claim that the left-wing media themselves has not been making for the last 2 years. And suddenly, where did all those concerns go? So we're gonna do a very quick overview here. On Friday, we played a report from 2016 and a podcast interview from September of a Princeton University computer science professor, Dr. Appel, going over all the problems with touchscreen voting systems. He said 7 minutes alone with a computer, 7 minutes alone with one of the computer voting machines with a $4 computer chip can shift votes around from one candidate to another and no one will know. Not me, Princeton University computer science professor. 2019, Wall Street Journal ran an article about how hardware and software for the voting machines comes from Russia and Chinese companies. And the whole article is about how these Russian and Chinese companies could, once again, sabotage the election for Trump. Today, crickets, nothing. I don't hear anything about that. It was Wall Street Journal. Yesterday, we played a video from NBC News, August 12th, 2019. This is a little over a year ago. And the headline was, NBC News gives an inside look into how hackers can target voting systems with ease. Here's a clip.
And yet here these kids were who had opened it up. They said, look, you can pop the front off of it and here's a port you can get into right here. That's easy. You know, all kinds of stuff that you could certainly do within 6 minutes behind a curtain, much less if you had extra time because any of these were connected to the web, as we discovered a couple of days before.
NBC News, PBS NewsHour, 8 days before the election, they did a whole 7-minute segment. Will Georgia's new voting machines solve election problems or make them worse? Here's a clip from that. I think this is the hacker guy in the beginning, and then the next clip that we put together is University of Michigan computer science professor.
They have set up a complicated system which is centralized and doesn't seem to have any safeguards.
By analyzing the structure of the QR codes, I've been able to learn that there's nothing that stops an attacker from just duplicating one. And the duplicate would count the same as the original barcode.
What? And now it's absurd, we're told, to suggest that anything like that could be a problem in the election that just happened. Where's PBS today? 8 days before the election, they're like, hey, everyone, this is a huge, giant problem. After the election, what voter fraud? No voter fraud. No voter fraud. What are you talking about? The election's over. Move on. Where are all these investigations now from PBS? PBS NewsHour doing any special reports on Georgia election fraud today or ever again? Of course not. They were building a case for 4 years, but certainly the last 2 years. The left has been building a case about voter fraud where that if Trump won in the end, they could deploy it all and crush Trump. But now that they don't need it, they're being awfully silent about it. This is from 2018. This is Amy Klobuchar and Elizabeth Warren, all right? Right-wing conspiracy theorists, Amy Klobuchar and Elizabeth Warren. We have concerns about the spread and effect of private equity investment in many sectors of the economy, including the election technology industry, an integral part of our nation's democratic process. These problems threaten the integrity of our elections and demonstrate the importance of election systems that are strong, durable, and not vulnerable to attack. Today, crickets from these two. New York Times 2012, error and fraud at issue as absentee voting rises. That article is from 2012. Absentee ballots this year are over 10x what they were in 2012. So if the New York Times had any concern about fraud with absentee ballots in 2012, they should be 100 times more concerned. So think about it. If the number of absentee ballots went up 10x, That's 100 times more fraud, or more than 10x fraud, because it's so much easier with 10 times as many ballots. And I don't want to hear anything from the left about, legitimate elections or whatever, all this stuff. But this is Washington Post. This is, I think we got the Clinton one first, right, guys? Hillary Clinton. All right, he's an illegitimate president who stole the election. And he knows it because Russian goons stole it. And then the next one is Jimmy Carter saying pretty much the exact same thing. You can read it yourself. Trump is illegitimate. But this election, no fraud whatsoever. All right, check this story out. Have you heard anything in the last, how long is the election? 2 weeks, 3 weeks? Have you heard anything about naked ballots? Have you heard that term? Let's go back a bit. USA Today, October 12th, 2020, so 3 weeks before the election. This is what they said. Here's the headline. Do we have the headline? Yeah. Okay, so here's the headline. Okay, so it's all about how absentee ballots, many of them get rejected. Last month, the Pennsylvania Supreme Court handed down a decision that could dramatically raise the number of rejected ballots in Philadelphia County to as much as 40,000. Voters put their absentee ballots, this is in Pennsylvania, voters put their absentee ballots into a privacy envelope, and then they put that envelope into another envelope to be mailed. If they forget to use both envelopes, then their vote won't be counted, a common mistake. This is one of the city councilmen of Philadelphia said. People just don't think about putting one envelope into another envelope. It's just not something you do, okay? So it's called naked ballots. In Pennsylvania, if you don't put your absentee ballot into both envelopes, it's called a naked ballot. Now, right before the election, there was this celebrity PSA where they were all naked. It was very shocking to get your attention. And they made 3 points in this video. First, read directions. Second, if it says use a black pen, use a black pen. And third, make sure you put it into both envelopes. Otherwise, it's a naked ballot and it won't be counted. Here's a little bit of the video.
In some states like Pennsylvania,
there are 2 envelopes you have to stuff your ballot in. Otherwise, it's called a naked ballot.
Naked ballots, and you don't want to have one of those.
Have you heard anything about naked ballots? So before the election, make sure you use both envelopes. Make sure you use both envelopes. Haven't heard anything about it. Have you heard anything about naked ballots? Of course not, because the left doesn't want any of those ballots thrown out, because they're mostly going to be Biden voters, of course. So we had these rules, and the left was very sure that everyone followed the rules, but then all of a sudden, they just completely disregarded them? Or are we supposed to believe that everyone did follow the rules? That article from USA Today says that Philadelphia County had 3 times the state's rejection rate in the 2016 election, right? So you have the state rejection rate of absentee ballots, and Philadelphia County had 3 times as many. That article projected that county would have about almost 15,000 ballots rejected from that county alone. But let me give you this. And statewide, so that they projected that county alone would have 15,000 ballots rejected. Statewide, there's only been 1,000 ballots rejected in all of Pennsylvania. Because everyone did because that PSA was so effective and everyone in Pennsylvania did such a great job following directions. Yeah, right. In 2016, the rejection rate in Pennsylvania was 1%. In 2018, the rejection rate was 4.7%. Today, it's 0.03%. In this election, it's 0.03% rejection rate. Now, I'll give the election people in Pennsylvania the benefit of the doubt here. Maybe they were just so overwhelmed with ballots. Well, I'm certain they were overwhelmed with ballots. That they were like, listen, we can't reject them now. We can't deal with it. We have to come back and do it later. But are they going to? And is Trump's team pushing that? A 2% rejection rate, which would be in between what 2016 and 2018 were. A 2% rejection rate would swing the election about 50,000 votes, and that's what Biden's up right now. So my point here, though, is USA Today wrote about this 3 weeks before the election. These celebrities got naked about it, and now all of a sudden it's not a thing anymore. I have never made a voter fraud claim that the left-wing media has not been making for the last 2 years. Where are they now? Home title theft. This is a wild thing. Here's what happens. Someone hacks in to the county registrar's office. So first of all, do you trust the cybersecurity system of your local county registrar's office? Remember we talked last week about some 17-year-old hacked into the Twitter accounts of 130 of the top celebrities on Twitter. Remember it was like Joe Biden, Barack Obama, Elon Musk, Kanye West, and it was a 17-year-old who did that. I trust the cybersecurity protections of Twitter more than I do your local county registrar's office. All right, so someone hacks into it, and where there's a will, there's a way, and there's a lot of money to be made off of you from this fraud. So they hack into the county registrar. They get they forge your signature, and they get a quick claim deed on your home, and then they start taking out loans against your home until they take all your equity, and you have no idea this is happening until you start getting collection calls. You're like, I didn't. And then there's nothing you can do about it at that point. Home title lock. They monitor your home's title. So if anyone tries that stunt on your home, you get a message immediately and you can shut it down before they do all the damage. Now there's another aspect of home title lock, which is awesome. Have you ever been to court before? Have you ever been dragged into court for something? This is a fraud case. Without home title lock, you are the one who has to get the lawyers and get bogged down in this massive fraud court case for a year. Like, what a pain. If you have home title lock, they cover up to $500,000 in lawyer fees, and you have their entire team to fight and do all that for you, which is a huge relief. HomeTitleLock.com. You can register your address and see if you're already a victim. Yikes. And then use the promo code RADIO for 30 days of free protection. HomeTitleLock.com. Spread the word. Hey, Slater Crusaders, real quick on that Pennsylvania rejection rate. I feel like people think I'm making this stuff up. Like I was talking about this on my radio show the other day, and someone called in and they're like, Slater, I've never heard this in anywhere. I'm like, yeah, I know. They're like, oh, CNN's not talking about this. Like, what are you out of your mind? You're still watching CNN? You still think the lame stream is gonna cover all this stuff? Of course not. So here's just one of the headlines about rejected ballots from the past. This is WHYY, which is NPR, PBS in Philadelphia. And that's where you can look at that article and you can get the data on previous elections. People think I'm making this stuff up. So in 2016, again, in Pennsylvania, 1% of absentee ballots were rejected. In 2018, in the midterms, 4.7% of absentee ballots were rejected. It's usually higher for first-time voters. This election, there were 2.6 million absentee ballots. That's 10x what there's ever been before. And only 1,000 have been rejected. That's a rejection rate of 0.03%. A 2% rejection rate would swing the election by 52,000 votes. So in this recount/audit, which are two different things as we talked about yesterday, will that be looked at? Can the Trump team get these ballots rejected if they didn't follow the rules? And or can they convince the Republican Pennsylvania legislature that something would need to be done about it? Now, that sentence I just said seems like a bridge too far, perhaps, for you and for a lot of people getting the Pennsylvania legislatures involved. Check this story out. I think this is the precedent that the president needs as he makes his case moving forward. Let me do a quick sidebar first. Sidney Powell just jumped in my head. We don't have time today to talk about Sidney Powell, but let me just say this about her and about Trump's team. You guys better make your case, and it better be rock solid on voter fraud. It has to be rock solid and super simple to understand and explain, okay? It cannot be, oh, well, this person knows this person who was on the board of this company who knows this other person from Burisma no. Like, you're losing everyone. It's not gonna work. It's not rock solid enough, not good enough. And it also can't even be, oh, well, this person says, that's not good enough either. Trump's team today, the last couple of days, have been making massive voter fraud claims. And I need more than an affidavit, because I'll tell you this, I am certain that someone who thinks that they're getting rid of Hitler out of the White House would rig the election, right? If someone thinks that they're getting Hitler out of the White House, they would rig the electronic voting. There's no doubt about that. I'm certain of it. I'm also certain that someone who loves the president would lie on an affidavit about it. So I need more than just this person says or this person saw. But we'll talk about that when the case is made, which better be soon, guys. All right, anyway, so check this out. This is the New York Times, 1994. I think this is the precedent that the president needs. The headline here, do we have the headline, gentlemen? Yes, we do. Shifts Pennsylvania Senate vote fraud. So here's the story. Federal judge, 94, invalidated throughout all of the absentee ballots for a state Senate race. The Democrat won the race if the absentee ballots were counted, and the judge invalidated all of them, and the Republican ended up winning, and there were very high stakes here because that race decided which party controlled the state Senate, which is a big deal, right? So this has happened before. One judge threw out all of the absentee ballots. Now in 1994, it wasn't that many. It was like a couple thousand, but the principle's still the same. So the question is, well, what was considered fraudulent back in 1994? The quaint days of 1994. This is the New York Times. It was an elaborate fraud in which hundreds of residents were encouraged to vote by absentee ballot even though they had no legal reason, like a physical disability or a scheduled trip outside the city to do so. That was it. That's it. That's all it took. Because hundreds of people were encouraged to sign up for absentee ballots when they didn't really have a reason. Now today, I looked up the Pennsylvania election website, and it says that you can request an absentee ballot for, quote, any or no reason, which is such a bizarre way to put that, right? You'd think they could just say for any reason, but they put no reason. It's just no reason whatsoever. And the left has been changing that over the years because they know why. They know why. They've gotten exactly what they wanted. New York Times, in many instances, according to Republicans who testified during a 4-day civil trial last week, Democratic campaign workers forged absentee ballots. On many of the ballots, they used the names of people who were living in Puerto Rico or serving time in prison, and in one case, the voter had been dead for some time. This is the judge. Substantial evidence was presented establishing massive absentee ballot fraud, deception, intimidation, harassment, and forgery. Indeed, this is the New York Times. Indeed, the two Democrats on the 3-member Board of Elections testified that they were aware of the voter fraud, had intentionally failed to enforce the election law, and had tried to conceal their activities by hurriedly certifying the Democrat candidates as the winner. So they knew what was going on, turned a blind eye, and then tried to cover it up by just saying, oh, here's the winner. Democrat wins. Now, so is that, you're with me, like small ball compared to what's going on? Like, that's all it took back in 1994 to throw out all the ballots? A couple hundred voter fraud, things like that? But the Democrats did admit to it, which is noteworthy. I don't think any Democrat would admit to anything today. Here's the precedent for Trump. Okay, here's the important part. Legal experts said that the judge's decision was highly unusual because he threw out all of the 1,757 absentee ballots. The judge wrote in his ruling, the will of the electorate is reflected in the votes cast on the voting machines. So it would be in-person voting. In justifying his decision to throw all the ballots, he cited a similar situation in Alabama, where that case, the Court of Appeals ruled in '86 that there was no need to be, quote, mathematically precise when a candidate had engaged in massive violations of election law. Whoa, geez. There's no need to be mathematically precise when a candidate had engaged in massive violations of election law. Ruh-roh. There was a election integrity group out of Chicago that was quoted in this story. And the head of that group said, vote fraud is moving out of the polling places and into people's living rooms. Again, that was 1994. The people involved with that would freak out if they saw the absentee ballots of this election. 10x what was normal. Again, last election, there were 260,000 absentee ballots in Pennsylvania. This year, there were over 3 million requested. And indeed, the voter fraud has moved from the ballot box to the living room. So again, 1994, a small amount of fraud, a small amount of it, and a very low bar of it. Right? The low bar was, oh, you're not physically disabled. You shouldn't have gotten an absentee ballot. Like that was the small bar, a tiny amount and a small bar of voter fraud caused a judge to throw out all the absentee ballots. It's happened before. The question is, can Trump pull it off again? Now, either way, we are not out of this, and it's going to be a crazy couple weeks. There's two things that gold is most directly tied to. The biggest one is the value of the dollar. All right, stock market's up and down, and emotional swings all over the place. Focus on the value of the dollar. And we have trillions of dollars of spending, like it's nothing. That's the crazy, like the people in DC, the politicians in DC are negotiating trillions of dollars spending. Like the Democrats are like, oh, we need this $3.5 trillion bill. And the fiscally responsible Republicans are like, whoa, let's not get crazy here. How about 2.7 trillion? It's like, geez, God. And the feds are printing money and like no one even reports on it anymore. Like it's just an afterthought. All of this has consequences. You think it's just funny money forever? It's inflation and it can't be ignored, and then gold goes up big time. And then the other thing is political instability. And we're in the midst of it right now. Right now we're in a little calm before the storm, but a storm is coming. Patriot Gold Group. Any questions you have about gold, silver? They've never been busier, but a real person picks up the phone after 2 rings, which is awesome. A+ Better Business Bureau, 4 years consumer affairs, 5 stars, #1 gold IRA dealer. These guys are the best. So if you believe, as I do, that there are some real underlying problems with our economy and the value of the dollar, buy gold and silver. Patriot Gold Group, 1-800-798-4260. 1-800-798-4260 or patriotgoldgroup.com. Spread the word. Hey, Slater Crusaders. So you may have, there's been a lot going on with the elections. We have not covered this as much as we normally would have in normal times, but there's a bit of controversy going around because Harry Styles is wearing a dress on Vogue or whatever. So it brings up yet again, which I think is one of the most important issues of our day, and that is this lie of toxic masculinity and lack of real masculinity and properly defined masculinity in our culture. And coming up in the next segment, we're going to talk about a Civil War hero, William Cushing, who was dripping with masculinity, and it saved the war for the North. Anyway, we'll get to that in a minute. Inez Stepman is with us right now. She's a senior policy analyst at the great Independent Women's Forum. Inez, how are you today?
I'm great. How are you?
Wonderful. And we've talked to your husband before, who has a very masculine beard. So there's no doubt about his masculinity. But can you speak to us a bit about this lie of toxic masculinity?
Sure. And before we even get to toxic masculinity and the differences, I think, between the right and the left on this, I think it's time that we stop getting gaslit on cultural issues, right? Because the left is the aggressor in all of these like sort of culture war issues. And then when the right responds, we're told, oh, this isn't important. This is irrelevant. Why are you focusing on this guy in a dress, for example? Yes. I don't care what Harry Styles wants to wear. Honestly, I really don't care what that guy wants to wear. But we know that this is part of a larger push against so-called toxic masculinity. In fact, the fact that he wore a dress on this Vogue cover was covered in numerous outlets with the headline, Harry Styles challenges toxic masculinity. So don't let yourself be gaslit into thinking that you can't push back against this stuff or that it doesn't matter. In fact, I think the right does too much of that. We say it doesn't matter, and then 5 years later it becomes, the norm in your local, kindergarten. So it is important to push back against this stuff, and we're always being told that we can't have opinions on things like this.
Let me jump in. So let me jump in on this. I want to slow that down because that is so brilliant and so important to understand and not be tricked. So you're saying the left is the aggressor, like they're the cultural aggressors. We've had guests on the show use the term, what's the colonizers? They've used that term before. Moral imperialists is the word that Darren Beatty used or whatever. So anyway, so they're the aggressors, the cultural aggressors. And then when conservatives kind of say like, hey, hold on, I don't know if men should be wearing dresses, we get accused, what's the comeback from the left? Oh, you guys,
You're
worrying
obsessed,
about stupid.
right?
Yeah, that's right, you're
You're obsessed with, Harry Styles. I trust me, I'm not obsessed with like Harry Styles. I do like Vogue. I mean, I like fashion, but this isn't even new, right? And of course, people have brought this up. David Bowie did this. This is not a new thing. Kurt Cobain dressed as a woman a few times, right? It's not the individualized act. It's that it's part of a larger culture that says to men, that masculinity is something that they should be ashamed of, that being a traditional and man and having traditional masculine virtues, like, for example, not showing your emotions too easily, or having the instinct to protect and lead or those around you, that those are negative traits, that they're toxic, that they're sexist. And in fact, I think one of the reasons that male-female relations are so much more fraught than they used to be, and why there's so many misunderstandings between men and women these days, is because we don't really learn about the differences between men and women. We don't really understand each other because we're attached to this idea that we ought to be interchangeable and the same in every way, or we're not equal. And I think it's very damaging. So yeah, this is part of a larger culture war issue, and I'm not going to, again, to be gaslit into that they can run headlines for the last 3 days celebrating Harry Styles for challenging toxic masculinity, and we can't push back and say, hey, you know what? There are a lot of nice things about so-called toxic masculinity. In fact, a lot of women like it.
So let's actually go through that. So let's do a traditional. What's one aspect of a traditional masculinity that you think we need to get back to, and why is it good?
Well, I think I just listed 3 there that are all really important for the building of civilization, right? It's important that there are courageous men that lead. Yes, women can lead, but traditionally, as you mentioned, especially with regard to the Civil War, right? We need men who are courageous and willing to sacrifice to be able to not only build civilization but then protect it. And then we need men to be a little bit less sensitive and emotional than women. There is a good balance between men and women in that regard. That doesn't mean that, men can never cry or, you can take all of these things to extremes. And of course, virtues are virtues regardless of what sex has them. But there are certain virtues that are correlated with being a man more than being a woman. And we need those things to build civilization, to build happy marriages, and to protect, as I said, to protect civilization. And when we talk about toxic masculinity, oftentimes those traits show up, those exactly toxic traits, like, for example, using violence and strength to, bully, intimidate, or hurt innocent people rather than to protect them. Those are often exactly the kind of traits that crop up either in a home or society at large, where there are no positive role models for how to use strength in a positive masculine way, rather than, trying to pretend that men ought not to be strong to begin with. So I think the notion is backwards, and it's damaging, especially to young boys.
That is the biggest point of all, right? So when the left tries to make boys more like girls, one of the consequences is boys then, instead of being to a properly channeled masculinity, then, as you said, go off into this the very masculinity they say at least they're trying to prevent, right?
Yeah, there's kind of 2 reactions, right, to not having a strong role model either in society or most especially in your own home, like a father or a trusted father figure. There are 2 directions boys can go, right? One is they do become effeminate, and then they find out when they get a little older that in fact girls don't like effeminate men oftentimes, and end up having contempt for them or don't want to date them, despite whatever they say. That if you watch what women do as opposed to what feminists say, women do not appreciate feminized men or men who are more sensitive than they are. So that's one direction, sort of the boys who follow the culture and then find out that there are some negative negative consequences to that. But then the opposite, oftentimes, because there is something real and biological about the energy that boys have, or their instinct to roughhouse, to fight each other, right? There is something real and biological there, and when it's not properly channeled, it can go overboard. It can get overly aggressive. It can be channeled into inappropriate avenues where then you really do have somebody who's out of control, who's directing violence towards women or people weaker than himself. And again, these are all rooted in a biological difference between men and women. And if we ignore it, I don't see how any good can come of ignoring reality as opposed to accepting reality and then trying to channel it into a positive direction, which is basically what people have been trying to do for millennia. But we think we're smarter than that.
Just to put a cap on this, literally right before we started to talk, I went to YouTube and I watched, there was a YouTube commercial for a Subaru Forester. I'm not kidding you, it was the first time I've seen this. And it had a guy, an effeminate guy, on the back of the Subaru. They were in like the woods, camping. Back of the Forester, back of the Subaru. And then his wife walked by carrying a bunch of firewood. And she said, "Oh, you saw a snake again?" And he said, yeah. And then the headline was like 87 inches ground clearance or whatever. So you had the man scared of the snake, hiding, cowering on top of the Subaru as the woman was carrying the firewood, doing all the work, right? Like who's that for? What is that commercial?
Well, and it's not the only one, right? We could laugh about this. And again, there's always the pushback. Oh, what do you care about a little commercial? Like, why are you so sensitive? No, because it's every commercial, right? This is the 10th, 20th, 50th, 100th commercial like this. And on the flip side, if you showed a commercial or, for example, a TV show that did have a more traditional dynamic between men and women, there'd be 80 think pieces about how it was sexist, right? So these things only go one way for the most part. I mean, it's exhausting in film now, in Hollywood movies. You can't have a strong male character anymore. It's all, these kinds of go girl female characters who are sometimes extremely unrealistic, right? You have size 2 women fighting hand-to-hand combat and like tossing men over their shoulders, right? But it's also, that dynamic doesn't leave many good role models for women either, right?
Oh, yes, very good. Yeah, go down that line. That's wonderful, because I have a daughter too. I have a 4-year-old son, an 8-month-old son, and a 2-year-old daughter. So yeah, what does this mean for daughters?
Yeah, I mean, it means that there aren't feminine role models. And the reality is that, yes, there are outliers. There are women who are more aggressive. I'm not saying exceptions don't exist. But there are no role models in film, largely, especially sort of mainstream film. I'm not saying, throughout history. Obviously, there's plenty of good movies that show humanity and have feminine role models. But there's no model of feminine strength, right? You got to be like the guys, in hand-to-hand combat, or you're a weakling. Like, that's often the message that you get from these go girl films, where instead of showing, for example, if you go back, like women who could be strong while being feminine, women whose strength was perhaps keeping the homestead together while the men went off to war, right? Women on the frontier in Westerns, nobody could call those characters weak, right? But they were feminine. They were showing a female strength, not a like sort of faux male copy. And again, this is not, I don't see how this is in any way positive about women. It's in many ways anti-women. It doesn't give us role models that actually comport with the way that most girls actually are. And it creates this pressure to be more masculine, or you're a weakling, or, you got to carry the firewood around and not be afraid of snakes, or you're not a strong woman. And I think that's ridiculous.
Yeah, wow, that's so good. The future is female, we're told, Inez, whatever that even really means. What do they even mean by that?
The future, so.
Sorry, say that one more time.
You need both to create the future, so I'm really not sure.
Yeah, good point. What does that shirt even mean? You see that in Target, like the kids' clothes. The future is female. What are they talking about?
That started on the runways, by the way, speaking of the influence of pop culture, of fashion, and all the stuff that trickles down to Target. Now you have every kid wearing it. But that started on the runways. yeah, it's obviously ridiculous, but that is the future that the left wants. And to tie it to more, sort of concrete policy agenda items, right? You have the revival in this era of the Equal Rights Amendment, which is taking us from equality, which we already have. There's nobody who suggests that women, for example, don't have First Amendment rights, don't have Second Amendment rights, right? We don't have the trial by jury. We don't have men and women on juries to begin with, right? Yes, at one point we did not, but today there is nobody who suggests that women's rights are not equally protected as men's under the Constitution and under federal law and under all 50 state law. All of those laws forbid sex discrimination, and yet the left is pushing the ERA as a way to create equality between men and women. And what it really might do is exactly encode into law this kind of this cultural idea that you and I are talking about, which is that men and women are the same. Especially if we look at outcomes and we see radically different, we should expect to see radically different choices between men and women. But increasingly, the left has a problem with that on aggregate, right? They say that women must make the same choices, for example, with regard to family and career as men, or there's some kind of discrimination going on. And so there is this not just cultural push, but it turns into a hard legal push, right? It turns into attempting to write legislation to try to make men and women exactly the same by fiat. And that is tyrannical, right? And that is going to cause major problems, particularly for women, because there are situations in which treating women as women, is to protect them or to keep them from getting physically hurt, like the fact that we don't, until recently, admit men into the boxing ring with women. We don't put men and women in prisons together, right? These are basic common sense things that the ERA and other legislation pushed by the left might actually outlaw. Right. So
really good.
This idea has consequences. This idea that men and women must be identical. It has, emotional consequences and consequences in our personal lives when girls feel they have to be the same as the boys. But it also has societal consequences, and it has real legal consequences at the end of the day when you ignore the differences between men and women and pretend they don't exist.
Superb. Inez Stepman. Inez, where should I send people to learn more and follow you?
You can find my work at iwf.org along with the work of my fabulous colleagues, and I'm also often a writer over at the Federalist.
Okay, which is the best? iwf.org. Wonderful, Inez. Let's do it again. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.
Have a wonderful day. Let's give you an example of some of that toxic masculinity coming up next. Civil War hero William Cushman. We'll do that next. Mike Slater. True story. Spread the word. Hey, Slater Crusaders, I want to change gears here a little bit, and I want to get back to talking about big principles and leadership personalities. Just refocus on that again. I want to do that with our next guest, the author of Civil War Commando, William Cushing, and the daring raid to sink the ironclad CSS Albemarle. And Jerome Priestler is here. Jerome, how are you, sir?
Good morning. I'm fine. How are you?
And I think we've gone over it 100 times. I think it's Priestler, and I just said Priestler. Yeah. Mr. Priestler, how are you? I'm glad you're here.
I'm fine.
Let's give me the short of the story of this man and what he did that gave him a hero's grave at the Naval Academy's cemetery. A man I've never even heard of. Who is he?
Well, William Cushing was a 19-year-old lieutenant in the Navy during the Civil War. It's important to keep in mind that he was not anyone that was projected to be successful. In fact, he was booted out of the Naval Academy just when he was 16 or 17. He was readmitted into the Navy, kicked out of the Navy again for insubordination and other things, and really was given a third chance. And for about a year before his raid on the Albemarle, distinguished himself with a whole series of commando-style expeditions that landed him this assignment. And to get to your question, that assignment was to destroy, i.e. blow up, the CSS Albemarle, which was a 160-foot long ironclad behemoth, if you can imagine, kind of a destroyer in Mad Max territory. And Will went up against it on a 30-foot long launch. So that kind of gives you an idea of what kind of bravery / craziness was involved in this mission.
I'm looking at this thing. This is like, it's like a tank. It's like half submarine, half ship.
Right.
Like tank, you're right, Mad Max style tank hanging. I think the thing's outrageous. So how did he get to it? And what did he do once he got on it?
Well, there was one vulnerability on the ironclad, and that was the point where its iron hull met its iron plated hull met a small wooden portion of it that was at the waterline, or just below the waterline. Will didn't know which it would be, so he devised this contraption, which was called a spar torpedo. It was movable. We think of torpedoes as something that shoots through the water nowadays. That's not what it was in the Civil War. It was, in fact, an explosive warhead that was attached to a long pole that was, in fact, attached to the front of this little boat that he was on. He was able to, with his contraption, raise it up and down, and he comes up upon the ironclad in the dark of night, in the middle of October. It was raining, it was foggy. He's being fired at from two shores, as well as from the ironclad, which has a wooden log barrier in front of it. Fortunately for him, there's slime on the barrier. He's attached a steam engine to this 30-foot launch. He goes full steam ahead over the log barrier. The slime on the log allows him to go flying over it. He lands on the other side like a pancake that's been flipped, and then uses this contraption with everything blowing up around him to target the specific point on the ironclad that's vulnerable. And he pulls it off, dives into the water moments before exploding with the launch that he's on. So that's Will Cushing in a nutshell. What else?
No, like, what in the world? What was the? Let's just wrap up like the storyline there. What was the effect of that on the Civil War? Like what blowing up this ship? What did that do?
It had a great effect. The Albemarle was guarding Plymouth Harbor, which was a really important shipping and military hub. Also, for the Union, the war was really dragging on a variety of fronts, and Lincoln was under a lot of heat to come to a settlement, a victory, an agreement with the Confederacy, whatever. This gave Lincoln a great boost in morale. It was announced in all the newspapers. Will was treated to all sorts of appearances around the country, and Admiral Charles Farragut himself, who was the first Rear Admiral of the Navy, in fact, the position was created for him, called Cushing the hero of the Civil War. Lincoln gave him a special commendation. So it was both a strategic and a victory in terms of morale.
Yes. Yeah, very good. Okay, let's talk about the man himself. So first of all, the fact that he's 19, right, like that blows my mind. But I mean, that's true with all these war heroes. They're usually very young. But first of all, why did he fight? Why did he fight? And then why did he keep fighting, even though he was getting kicked out of the academy and all the rest?
Cushing is one of the appeals of Cushing to me was that he's this romantic figure. He was gallant. He was almost a throwback to an even earlier age, like a knight. And to him, he was fighting for. He had really no great political leanings, but he was fighting for the honor of. He was from a small town in New York called Fredonia, which is in upstate New York, and he was fighting for the honor and glory of New York. And that's really how he fancied himself. He also always saw himself as commanding a ship, commanding a vessel. That to him was again full of glory and adventure. So he was fighting for that. He was fighting for kind of deep, I don't know if you'd call them principles, but certainly a deep code of honor that I'm not even certain where it came from, because
I'm sorry, I wanted to ask that because first off, that's such an amazing answer, because I think we're so pragmatic today, right? So it'd be like, oh, he was fighting because he wanted to end slavery or something like that, right? But this was, I don't know how to say bigger than that, because that's a noble cause in and of itself. But I like the way you said it, romantic. It's such a romantic thing. Yeah, I was going to ask you, like, where could this have come from in his childhood that he wanted to live the gallant life?
It's interesting because when he was very young, and I mean like 6 or 7 years old, his father disappeared on the family. And that's kind of a whole story in itself. But they were left in a Chicago boarding house. It was Will and I believe there were 4 or 5 siblings, and his mother. They migrated back to Fredonia, which was where his father was born. And even there, though they were helped by relatives, really had to make do for themselves. Will was a really scrappy kid. He got into a lot of fights, and they could be brutal. But one interesting quality that he had, even as a 9, 10-year-old kid, was he had this really great compassion for people that were weaker than himself. So even though he was a terrible student and he would lead a gang of kids, he founded a gang, and I can't offhand remember the name, but he would basically escape from school with them, and they would vault the fence, and he would lead them off on these imaginary missions through the woods, which is interesting because this is what he does later on in his naval career. But he also had this quality where if there was a weak kid, if there was a kid who was sick with tuberculosis, he would take care of these kids. So it was something that I think was deeply ingrained in him, and where it comes from, again, who really knows? But it was there from a very young age.
That's such a beautiful story, and that is so knight-like to be fighting evil and at the same time to have the gentle touch and compassion on others. Gosh, that's wonderful. What do you think, to bring it to today? Because we just did our last segment was about masculinity in America Day and all this, and just how we raise kids. We talk about it all the time. What do you think the big lesson is for parents? And how we act, and then also how we raise our kids to have more of these noble traits?
Geez, that's a tough one. I don't know that I've really thought about it, other than to say that I think that we have certain expectations. Will did not fit a particular mold, and as I mentioned earlier, no one really saw that much in him. To be frank, they saw very little or nothing in him. But I think if there's a lesson in it, it's that it was there. We were just talking about what he was as a young man. If you look at from our perspective, if you look at his life and you look at the whole trajectory of his life, it's almost very predictable that he would be this kind of young man. So maybe if there's a lesson, and this is just off the top of my head, it's pay attention to your children and look at them as individuals. Maybe that in my own life, we won't get into it, but maybe there's a connection there. Maybe that's why I'm interested in these characters. So I think that it's really important for parents to let kids be who they are, give them some guidance, but really pay attention to what they're developing into, because sometimes we can't control that as parents. We can only look at what their essence is and kind of help them realize it.
First of all, I think that's a beautiful answer. And I think of how he could have gone in a very different direction, right? I mean, he could have used his courage, if you will, for evil, for bad. But fortunately, it got channeled into something noble and good, right?
Yeah. In fact, when he was kicked out of the Naval Academy, he disappeared for a month or so. And we don't know for sure where he was. I have some guesses, but the important part of this is that his brother Alonzo, who is actually received the Medal of Honor posthumously for his heroism in Gettysburg, was writing letters to his mother saying, "I hope Will is alive. We don't know where he is. I hope he hasn't joined up with a militia." And in those days, of course, what he was referring to was the different militias that were forming on both sides to fight the war, as apart from the armies and navies for the Confederacy and Union. So what I'm saying is, who knows which direction he would have gone in? You don't know.
Wow, amazing. All right, well, we need to know this name. This needs to be a household name, and I'm grateful that you're making it so. William Cushing, the daring raid to sink the ironclad CSS Albemarle, and the book is called Civil War Commando. Mr. Pricler,
I like what you read. It's very dramatic.
Oh, we will. Thank you, sir. Appreciate you being here.
Thank you very much. I'm glad to have
love
been
that. Yeah, let's know the name and the story of William Cushing. Beautiful. All right, we'll do it tomorrow. Have a wonderful day. Mike Slater, True Story. Spread the word.